Everybody, and welcome back to the RedBeard Outdoors podcast. I've got an amazing guest for you guys today. It's Bill Vanderheiden, and he is, you guys may know him as Iron Will Bill. He does some amazing work with broadheads and components, and also has done some fletchings here recently that we're going to get into. He knows way too much information for me to even be able to comprehend. He's one of those guys that's really smart. You get him in the room and you're just enthralled by all the information that he knows. But Bill, who are you? What are your kind of credentials for people that may not know you? I know you're a mechanical engineer, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to talking to you here. I'm a mechanical engineer. Have been one for, I don't know, 30 years or so now, I think. I developed products for other companies for many years before starting to develop broadheads and launch a company. I'm a big time bow hunter. I just love bow hunting. I want to get better at it all the time and just trying to develop products to make me more effective at it, really.
Well, that's awesome. So being a mechanical engineer, that gives you a lot of background with, basically just engineering new products and things along those lines. So my brother is a civil engineer, so he goes out and makes sure that bridges aren't going to collapse on you. But kind of explain what mechanical engineering does, and maybe some things that you've worked on that people might recognize outside of your broadhead company. That kind of let people know what you do. What is a mechanical engineer?
Yeah, mechanical engineer is, it's pretty broad. But in general, like the areas that I focused in the most were like, machine design, components design, materials, mechanics of materials, like, stresses and strains, how to design a component to take some kind of force or loading, not break. That's all part of mechanical engineering. Machine design, mechanism design, how components are going to fit together and be assembled, and that can be part of it too. There's computer modeling for stress strain, for I should say, so like fluid dynamics, that's also within mechanical engineering, like airflow or over broadheads, veins, things like that. That's something that you study in mechanical engineering. You can study how that fluid flows, and so air, I get this question sometimes, but air is a fluid too. So air and liquids are both fluids, or gases and liquids are both fluids. So I'm talking about air when I'm talking about broadheads. So you can look at the airflow over it and how the pressure is created on it, how it's going to cause it to spin or lift or or move from that. So vibration, sound, those are all within mechanical engineering. There's also like thermal, air conditioning, thermodynamics, all that stuff, which I'm not so interested in. But all the mechanics, the component design, there's a lot of materials too, like mechanics of materials, like how they act under stress, strain, how to choose the best materials for the job, what happens with the microstructures, say, of during heat treat of steels, all that's kind of all within mechanical engineering. So engineering is a really applied science. Mechanical engineering is applying physics for the most part, that has to do with um, an actual physical part, versus like electrical engineering is more like electrical flow. Chemical engineering is more like uh, the chemistry part of it. Civil engineering it's almost like it has a lot of overlap with mechanical engineering, but it's mostly going to be for like bridges, structures, things like that. A lot of it is going to be make it to code, and not so much design something from scratch, with a blank sheet of paper and design and develop it. But it can be. But yeah, mechanical engineering is really for broadhead design, anything bow, arrow, archery related. Mechanical engineering is the correct field, I would say, for doing that kind of stuff.
No, that's awesome. That's really cool. And that again, guys, like I was saying, he's got a lot of experience and knowledge combined, and that it's hard to find that in a lot of fields, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of book smarts, and then there's some people that have the knowledge. But when you can find it combined in a human being, I mean, it really makes you want to have a conversation with someone like that. And that's, again, why I brought Bill on, because Bill has done something that he's passionate about, and turned that passion and his knowledge into this company, which is Iron Will, which a lot of you guys out there will know of Iron Will with being the two blade broadheads, or with bleeders. And I've got some here, just this one right here. This is the single bevel with bleeders, or you might recognize this logo right here. All right. So with that being said, why did you get into a market that was so saturated with broadheads? I mean, you can go on Amazon, you can go to any store, Cabela's, wherever, and buy and walk for days and see broadheads. Why did you choose to get into such a saturated market with your knowledge and passion for bow hunting?
Yeah, I didn't get into it. I didn't start a company like most do, probably, that are more businessmen that like see a like an opportunity to make money. For me, it wasn't that. It was I see a need for a better broadhead for me personally. Um, After having a broadhead fail to penetrate an elk shoulder blade, I wanted to engineer a better product, for me personally, really, to be a more effective bow hunter. And I was kind of just devastated that I didn't penetrate the scapula. It's not that thick of a bone. And, I could have had this nice bowl, and instead I had just the heartbreak, after years of work. So, to me, it was really all about just making a better product. And then after finding out, after many years of iterating and making it better and better, I got to a point where it penetrated bone like unbelievably well to me. I can get a pass through on a double shoulder blade hit on an elk, for instance. I shot a pig, a big boar, a few days ago, and right to the knuckle, actually, 2 to 3 inches of bone, sliced completely through it, kept going, and it looked like new. And so when I realized what performance you can really get with the right materials and enough engineering, I had a product that I thought, I want to share this with others. And for one, all my friends and family was wanting me to sharpen broadheads for them over and over. And I thought I need to get this into production. Um, but really, it was to try and meet a personal need. And I thought there really could be a much better broadhead. Even though there's 50 to 75 new broadheads per year, to me, they're really kind of all the same junk. It's they're using low cost manufacturing, low cost materials, and then they're trying to make them so they can make them for a few bucks and sell them for 10 or 15 bucks. And that's really not what I wanted. I wanted something that would perform above and beyond anything that was out there. So, and when I launched the company and I would talk to people about it that were in the industry and knew, and they're like, "Oh, broadheads, no, not a good area to go into. Right? It's saturated. There's too many of them, too much stuff going on." I'm like, "Well, I'm not really a businessman here. I'm just an engineer trying to make better products, and we'll see if And based on that feedback, I didn't think they were really going to sell and take off at the price point we had, but they did. We've grown a lot in the 6 years or so now, since launch.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's really cool to me when you find people like yourself that had an issue, unfortunately, and it sucks that you lost that bull, but that you're, instead of sitting there moping about it, and that's going to be your story that you tell your grandkids and sit around the fire and drinking a beer talking about the bull that got away, you are the other way where you're like, okay, that sucked. Now how can I make that not happen for me? And not only just for me, but for other people as well. And then you go out there and you test it. So you get down to Texas, and for those of you that don't know, and I'm trying to make this more of a thing for me as well. You can go down to Texas, and yes, it's a little bit of pay to play, or who you know, but with Texas, you can basically hunt year round, and you can go out and test your gear if you have the time and the money to be able to get down there. Definitely highly recommend that. Like what you were saying, you were down there testing your products with different animals, and so that's really cool. Now, at the when you're mentioning price point, it's definitely Your broadheads are premier broadheads. If you want to, whatever the classification is of the more expensive broadheads, people are probably going to look at them and get a little bit of a sticker shock. But I will say that your broadheads fly really well from my testing. And it's limited. I'm not, some expert, whatever, in archery, but from what I could tell, it definitely flies better. The aerodynamics are great. And I haven't had a chance to put them through an animal, but it sounds like you just put one through a knuckle of a boar, which, again, if anyone knows anything about pigs, you'll know that those things are built like tanks. Even their scapulas are thicker than most scapulas. And so that's pretty cool that you're able to put it through that pig and then find it and see that it was still sharp and good to go. So why, I mean, you just mentioned that you wanted to go with the premier product because you weren't necessarily trying to make a buck off of this. You were trying to find a good product that would work. You started out with the 2-blade. Did you have bleeders on your first version?
We did not. Our first prototypes, no, we didn't.
Mm.
For probably a couple of years of development, I did not have bleeders. I was just going for max penetration. Wanted to make sure I can get through the shoulder bone anywhere I hit it and get to the vitals and get the quick kill. And yeah, after 2 years of testing on a lot of deer, primarily whitetails at that point, we saw that just once in a while you get a very poor blood trail with just a straight 2-blade. And my brother Tim, I think he shot dozens of whitetails with his head. I think he'd probably shot 50 by the time we launched. But he was really pushing me that we should add a bleeder. There's just sometimes it's a very poor blood trail, and I didn't want to. I didn't want to compromise structural integrity or anything like that of the whole thing. And I iterated on it a few different times before I finally got an assembly, a location of the bleeder, an assembly that I felt like, okay, this does not compromise strength of the broadhead at all. It's not reducing penetration or minimal reduction in penetration, I would say, with it being set back and the size of it. Didn't really affect flight. And then it was getting that cross cut and opening up holes for much better blood trails in general. So yeah, it's something I didn't want to do, but in the end, it was the right thing to do. And yeah, I love them now. I recommend them for really everything in North America at this point. We make them with and without if you don't want them, but I recommend them unless you're going after like Cape Buffalo or Hippo or something where just maximum penetration is all that matters.
No, for sure. They're, and for those that didn't get a chance to, I know I popped one up here. So here's the other case that you guys offer. It's the plastic. It's not just plastic. What's the technical name of this case? The
It's
material?
it's ABS, so it's kind of a engineered plastic. We were using a thicker polyethylene one, but I knew I could get the same strength and have it be a more compact and lighter for people that want to throw in their pack on a backpack hunt or anything like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, six
So
pack
what,
case.
so what Bill's talking about here with the bleeders, for those that may not be familiar with his broadheads, are these two little blades right here on the sides. And this blade that I'm showing right here, this broadhead, is the single bevel, which I guess we'll talk about that here, because you started with the double bevel, so a bevel on both sides. Those who aren't familiar with that, this right here, whatever you can see on camera, um, there's that single bevel where it's just basically sharpened on one side and it's opposite sides of the broadhead
Yeah,
on either side there. So
here's that's the 125 head I
mhm,
think you're holding there. And so just for comparison, this is a double bevel where you can see bevels on both sides there.
yep.
And it's really the same blade on these two. It's just a single bevel versus double bevel grind.
So you started with the double bevel, which is obviously great for penetration, which you explained that really well, that was the main purpose of the broadhead, was to be able to penetrate wherever you put it through the animal. And then you kind of noticed there were some poor blood trails, which that in some animals, not most, but in some instances. And that can be a deal breaker why a lot of people don't like the 2-blade broadheads, why they want a 3-blade or mechanical. People preach about mechanicals because they open up a bigger hole, easier blood trail, more trauma, etc. So talk about that transition where you started looking from the double bevel to a single bevel, and why that's important for some people, and then from your testing as well, why that single bevel is pretty awesome.
Yeah, like you mentioned, I started with double bevel. I tested both of them. I tested a lot of broadheads for a couple of years before I started developing my own. And there was the Ashby studies that I'd read back then saying a single bevel um, with the rotation torques and pops apart bone better. It gets better penetration. But in my own testing, I wasn't really seeing that. I saw the single bevel and double bevel both were popping bone apart, and it could be just the speed difference between Dr. Ashby's longbow and my compound bow at the time. But I saw both were penetrating bone really well, and I liked the. I think a double bevel is has inherently a bit better like durability and sharpness combination. When you grind both sides and you're cutting through something, you've got kind of equal pressure on both sides. Say you're cutting through bone, for instance, and it's less likely to, whereas a single bevel, all the pressure's on one side, and it's more likely to want to bend over or break if the steel's not strong enough to
Mm-hmm.
hold it. So I think a double bevel is inherently a bit stronger. You grind both sides, and we do a multi-stage grinding, honing, get it extremely sharp. I kind of like that whole sharpening process a little better too. But yes, single bevels were getting very popular. A lot of people were asking us for them, and I decided to take another look at them. And really, I'd been testing single bevels that I didn't make. These are from other companies. So I thought, well, what I should really do to get an apples to apples comparison is make the best single bevel I can, compare it to our double bevel, and either see yes, it's inferior and we're not going to make it, or
Mm-hmm.
there's a good reason to go to market with it too. And so, yeah, a couple of years of testing, I really started liking them because of the rotation with them and how interesting how it kind of opens up holes. I've shot a lot of deer and elk where it's the hole is kind of square where it goes in because that single bevel with their single bevel bleeders too, and it all rotating, it does a nice job of opening up those holes in the hide, does more tissue damage through. And I was concerned there would be less penetration because of that pressure on one side and then the kind of the torque required to rotate it through there. In theory, I think that sounds like it would take some energy and go through, penetrate less. But in reality, I don't really see that. And I think it's because you got that rotational momentum of the arrow already providing some of that torque as it goes through. And man, they've been penetrating great. So I go back and forth between single bevel, double bevel on my own hunting, testing, and um, I think it's almost personal preference. They both perform really well. They both penetrate really well. They're both going through bone, really undamaged. So I did say I had to go up in a single bevel. I started at a 25 degree after talking to Dr. Ashby quite a bit, getting his input. I started with a 25-degree angle and increased it up to 32 to make it strong enough, I felt, to be able to really pound through bone or even hit like small rocks and things in the dirt and maintain that edge, not break away that edge. But at that 32-degree angle, yeah, I think it performs really well at this point.
Yeah, I'm excited to put it into actual testing in the field and see how it goes. But you can definitely tell. So, kind of for those of you guys that may not understand, that little this side right here that isn't sharpened, is what he's talking about being weak. And if you don't have, oh, sorry, this side that isn't necessarily sharpened, um, might end up being a little weak on if you don't have the right materials. And so it can bend over, get a little curl in it, which would cause it to be less sharp, etc. So with that being said, and I love the fact that you went back and tested it, and then again with the mindset of I'm going to create the best single bevel and not just test other people's stuff. Have you noticed a difference in um, trauma, like when you open up an animal, between the single bevel and the double bevel?
Yeah, it looks a bit different. I mean, our double bevel, you get very clean cuts all the way through. And that's one thing in talking to other guys that test a bunch of broadheads, like Cody Greenwood at Trad Lab, for instance. He'll push different like he'll do the, do a autopsy or necropsy, I think is the correct name, but and then see how did it cut the organs. Then he'll also like, and I've done this as well, just push like the broadhead through like a liver or a heart later and see what happens. Um, a lot of heads you'll get like a hole, but they won't cut. The blades won't cut all the way because they aren't sharp enough to cut. They push a lot of tissue aside. And what I see with our double bevels is you get cuts the full size of the blades all the way through. They both do a really good job of slicing all the way through. Our single bevels, there's some rotation going on, so it's kind of like twisting the tissue as it cuts.
Mm.
So yeah, it's almost like these curved cuts through there, and it does a bit more. There's a bit more trauma there, a bit more damage, I would say, is just going through.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they're both slicing well, quick kills. But yeah, some people are excited about having that rotation, maybe more damage, bigger, more open holes, and then are choosing a single bevel for that reason.
Right. And then the entry and exit holes on an animal as well. Are you noticing, you were saying with the single bevel, you notice more of a square entrance and exit than with the single or with the double bevel?
Yeah, the double bevel is pretty much a cross shaped, and then the corners kind of pull back because you think about if you're slicing in two directions like a cross, then those inside corners, there's no tension kind of holding them in anymore, so they pull back and you end up with a hole. But you can really see that cross kind of shape through the hide, and sometimes it opens up a bit more than others, but generally that's kind of shape to it. And with that rotation, it's some of them have been perfectly square. I don't know if I have I don't know if I can hold up a photo and have you see it, but it's been I can't say I completely understand how it gets to like almost a perfect square cut when it's rotating, but I've seen it on a number of deer and elk that I've shot now. And let me see here.
And with that hole being bigger, obviously, so for example, I had an instance. Oh yeah, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so let me hold it up here. You can see that's you see how it's almost like you took it with a knife and cut a square out of
Yeah.
it. So,
Hmm.
I've seen that exact look on a number of deer and elk now, and that's with that same head that you just showed, which is our single bevel 125 head there. So
No, that's awesome. Yeah, I had an experience this last year where it wasn't anything trophy or big. Not quite to that level of hunter yet, but I shot a little 2 point, and he didn't go very far, but I ended up losing him because of just the way the terrain was. And I thought I had a clean miss. Now it wasn't with your broadheads. This was with a different broadhead. But what had happened was it was such a steep shot downhill. It had gone through his like just between the spine, I guess just below the back strap. So it was a high hit because I was so high up and it was a super steep shot. And then the angle, he was quartered to me a little bit. So it went all the way through one lung, liver, and then out the guts on basically the right butt cheek of the deer. And so the upper hole, obviously there was no blood coming out of it because it was high up. And then the other hole was plugged by guts. It was crazy because it was a brand new, like fresh dumped snow in November of this last year. And there was not a drop of blood. Couldn't find my arrow. And I was like, well, I must have missed. I saw all the deer funnel out of the draw, etc. I looked around for probably half an hour, followed all the tracks, couldn't find any blood. Well, turns out about 2 weeks later, I found it, and it was like, I mean, he had gone maybe 50 yards, but he was down in this little drainage that I couldn't see unless I was actually in the drainage, and he had laid down and died. And so he didn't go very far, and obviously the trauma, internal trauma, was enough that he passed away, but there wasn't any blood trail. And so I could have, I mean, he had to have died there within probably an hour or so.
did the arrow
And
pass? Did the arrow pass through them completely?
yeah, completely passed through. Yep. And so, and it was with it was a kind of a hybrid mechanical. I had a cut on contact head, and then it had the mechanical blades that came out the side. And it, I mean, completely passed through. Great shot if I'd had blood. I mean, like I said, he expired probably within the hour.
You found your arrow though, right?
Mm-mm.
Oh, you
Nope.
didn't find the arrow.
It was
Okay.
so thick. Yeah. To be able to find the arrow, I would have had to bring like a chainsaw up there basically to cut through all the oak brush. But yeah, I just didn't get a blood trail. And so that was my biggest thing is that the internal trauma was so great, but he couldn't bleed out the top hole. And then the bottom hole was plugged by guts. So that's a big deal for a lot of people, the blood trail aspect of things. And so I think it's awesome that you showed a picture of it, and having those bigger holes, especially on either side with your focus on penetration, allows you to have a better blood trail. And also the more trauma on the internals allows the deer to expire quicker, or the elk, or whatever it is that you're hunting. So that was my draw to the single bevel. Now I've just got to put them into practice out in the field. But I really like that that's what your research has shown. And then obviously people that have put them through animals is showing the same thing. So for people out there that are concerned about the 2-blade broadheads, I think this is definitely a good option for that, because they fly great and they've got those options of penetration and the good blood trails. So
Yeah, and really our wide heads provide, I'd say, the best blood trails. Our standard like solid blade 125 or single bevel 125 like you have. That's an 1/16 main blade, 3/4 inch wide bleeder blade, so about 1.8 inches total cut. Be similar to like a 3-blade 1.25 inch broadhead would have the same like total cut of around 1.8 inches. Um, our wide heads are 1 3/8 wide main blade. Here's like our wide 125. 1 3/8 wide main blade, 3/4 inch wide bleeder blade, so you get 2.125 inch total cut. And yeah, that one just, well, it looks like I have a blade loose from the head here, but anyway, that blade is that cut width, just in general, is gonna get more blood on the ground. It's less forgiving at that width, so I don't. It's generally not my first choice for elk, antelope, caribou, things where I might be shooting 60 plus yards. Although I do shoot our wide vented really pretty well, that 125 and 100 grain, and we have a wide solid at 150 grain on up. But it does make a bigger hole, and we're just launching. Well, it'll be launched by the time this podcast comes out, but we've had a lot of people request the wide single bevel. So here it is for those of you watching the video. But we'll be launching that tomorrow, and that's the same as our wide double bevel, where we have an 1 3/8 wide main blade, 3/4 inch wide bleeder, so 2.125 inch total cut. But this big cut with the rotation does a lot of damage. I just shot a few pigs with it the last few days down in Texas, and it was impressive. Like I said, that one that went through the knuckle, 2 or 3 inches of bone, this head just cut right through that, and it looked like you cut with a laser or something. It was perfectly cut. You could take that piece of bone and fit it right back together where it came from. It was just sliced straight through. But yet the blade looked like new. There was no damage to the tip or any of the edges with that. But yeah, that's giving big holes, and with that rotation, I think if it's guys that are hunting whitetails or closer range shots, me personally, I don't like to shoot the wide solid, over 50 yards, because it's just not as forgiving. So what that means is, with that, if you torque your bow a little bit, get too excited, or if your bow's not tuned, or anything that's going to make your arrow kind of fishtail coming off your bow, that wider blade up front is going to make it less accurate. Really, is what it comes down to. If you got the right veins on the back, it certainly helps, and you're probably still going to hit within a couple inches at 40 yards. But it's not as forgiving as our standard blades for those longer shots. That's why I kind of recommend not using it if you're going to shoot really far. But I think it's going to be a great whitetail head. I'm going to go bear hunting with this on Friday up in Saskatchewan. It'll be a great bear head. Pigs, things like that. It's been working great for.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And then with the vented broadhead, which obviously or the vented wide, isn't the single bevel, but The only feedback that I've heard that's not good about it is the noise, which you're going to get from any vented broadhead. I haven't shot a vented broadhead, honestly, that's been quiet. Um, quote unquote quiet, whatever you want to call quiet. But what's with that being said, between that and then we'll get into the veins here that you've come up with AAE on. What is it about, or when would you say that noise of the arrow matters more for you, and you would switch to maybe that solid broadhead, versus when does noise not matter so much and you'd rather get that cutting diameter?
Yeah. Um, yeah, noise that is a tricky thing to figure out. People make general statements about it, and what I've found out, I just sponsored a study with the University of Colorado this past year to study improved arrow vane design for bow hunting with fixed blade broadheads. And part of that study was recording sound and analyzing the sound in great detail, looking at it, from the bow shot to where it passed. In this case, passed over the microphones, but think about it as like where the animal would be at impact, and then looking at that last 10 yards or so, really, of not just that impact in the peak, but what are they hearing in that last 10 yards where they could, it's almost too late to react, but where they could possibly still react to it. How loud is it then? Because what I see is when the bow shoots, the bow is pretty loud, and you get noise from the bow when that arrow is still like 5 yards down range. You're still getting the noise from the bow. It's pretty loud. And then the arrow is pretty quiet. And this is no matter kind of what the blades are or vanes are. From the standpoint of the deer, say at 40 yards, arrow's pretty quiet when it's like 5-10 yards away. And then as it gets within that last 10 yards is where the sound flares up. And so we're looking at that with different vanes, different broadheads, and we're looking at the frequency content, and we're looking at it for the peak frequencies for deer, which is a little bit higher than we're looking at for humans as well. But like, does it sound loud to your buddy if you got him downrange behind a tree or something? And then it doesn't really sound loud to a deer or not. So, and what we're seeing is if we try and analyze that data, say 10 yards back from the deer, it's pretty hard to pick up enough difference between a broadhead and a field point. This is like even a vented broadhead versus a field point, or a small vane versus a tall vane. When it's 10 yards from the deer, that the signals aren't loud enough, they aren't different enough to really pick it out. So you could argue that sound doesn't really matter very much, because the deer's not going to be able to pick up those differences until it's just about getting hit by that arrow, really. But let's just say they can react to that sound when it's 5 yards away, which is like, 5/100ths of a second, say, before it hits them. Then when you're looking at it, that's when you start to see some difference between a vented head and a vented blade, a solid blade. And then the vents really matter. Our V series with the smaller vents are probably the loudest head we have. But yet I've shot animals like antelope at 80 yards with that head, and they didn't react until the arrow passed. It started reacting just as the arrow was passing through them. So I really feel like they don't really hear that louder sound from vents, vented blades, until it's kind of too late, personally. Our solid blade is the quietest. Our wide vents I purposely made larger without any kind of steel in the middle of them that would make them smaller. It's kind of like blowing through a tube versus a whistle. They're quieter for that reason. So anyway, I choose to shoot. I've shot our wide 125 and our wide 150 quite a bit, which is the solid version of the same blade. And I choose to shoot the wide 125. I know it's a hair louder. I know it's more forgiving for flight. I can shoot it better at long range, so I choose it. So anyway, I don't worry much about it. But for those that do, yeah, our solid blade, either our like our S125 or SB125 or S100, SB100 are very quiet heads. We see that they're right down there with the field points in the sound in this recent study here.
That's awesome. So then, and that's really the only, I guess, negative thing that I've heard people talk about. Now, I don't know if there's some people that have run it and say it just sounds loud, and then there's other people that don't. But again, those same people and me personally, whenever I've run a vented broadhead, it does sound louder, obviously, than the solid. But I also understand why the vented makes sense for forgiveness, and then obviously for the weight savings, you can get that wider blade at a lower weight of the 125 grains rather than the 150. So would you say that you're for the wide blade, you typically try and keep it under 50 yards? For those that may take a shot at a deer or an elk at 60, 70, you would say probably go with the solid 125s or 100s in the smaller blade.
That's what I generally do and recommend. Now, if I happen to knock up a wide head and my shot ends up being 60 or whatever, I don't really worry about it. I mean, I know that I personally shoot the wides really well to 60, and I hardly see a difference in
Mm,
accuracy versus our standard. And it's actually like out at 100 yards where I see that my groups are opening up and I'm
mm,
getting a little bit more drop, a couple inches maybe more drop with the wide heads out that far. But that's going to be a bit dependent on the person, how well tuned their bow is, how good their form is. So it's kind of hard to say, and that's why we say in general like 50 yards. If you're, I think everybody, all the testers that we had shoot these when we first came out with the wides, we asked them all to test at 60 yards, and they all said that
mm.
they shot well for them at 60 yards. So I think it's being pretty safe. I think we're being pretty conservative. I just know that they aren't as forgiving, and we want people to
Yeah,
be successful and hit where they're aiming. Um,
yeah.
but personally, that's kind of how I decide to knock up too. Like I'll carry a mixed quiver when I'm elk hunting. I'll have currently I've been carrying either or both our S125 and SB 125 and our wide 125 in my
Mm,
quiver. And then if I'm setting up on a water hole or something, I'm knocking the wide. I know they penetrate like crazy, even though they're wider, they cut through like no problem. It's just more, longer shots. And, you know, some people like will probably bash me for this, but I practice long range a lot. I know I shoot to 100 yards almost every time I go out with field points and broadheads. I know I can make a shot, say 80 yards on an elk, and I shot a big bullet at 82 yards, and hit right where I was aiming. It went all the way through them. That was our S125. Zipped through them right in that vital V there into the muscle. That arrow was 20 yards past the elk, even at 80 yards, and it's a big bodied bull.
mm-hmm.
Right where I was aiming, he ran 40 yards and crashed. I love that head. It flies the same for me as the SB 125. But that's the heads that I knock up first for elk hunting typically, or caribou when I know I might get those bit longer shots like that. And if
Gotcha.
you're a 100
No,
grain
that
head user, the 100 grains are even a little more compact in the blade length, and they even fly a little better than the S125s. So.
no, that makes sense. And again, this is we're getting in. I ask these questions because we get into the weeds on these things, but basically what it boils down to is anytime you add more material up front, it's going to fly just a little bit different or get a little bit more drag, wind drag, whatever. Than if you don't. So like what you're saying, if you shoot the 100 grains and you go to 125s, there's going to be a little bit more material there. So you're going to notice a little bit of a difference versus the 150s to more than that on the wides. So just kind of keep that in mind as people are kind of again going into the weeds there. What are you more focused on, right? Do you want more cutting diameter? Or you wanting the single bevel? There's so many options now that you guys provide that's really really awesome. Do you want bleeders or not, etc. But you also brought up a really good point of having your bow tuned well, and there is probably a lot of people that work on their bows at home, and honestly there's a lot of things on YouTube now that you can go out and check out that's for free information. Make sure obviously it's a reputable source, but someone with experience with a bow that can show you what you need to work on. There's so many people as well that are willing to provide that information. That again, go to a reputable source. Don't just ask some Joe Schmo on the internet. And honestly, if you ask me how to tune a bow, I'm going to tell you to go find someone else, because I don't know how to tune a bow down to the nitty gritty. I just have an amazing bow shop. And I'm always open to learn. But you make a very valid point that it does come down to, how is your bow tuned, and then how are you shooting? Are you torquing it? Are you, making those excited shots? Are you punching the triggers you pull through? Whatever. There's so many variables that go into it. You need to get your own shot process down and your bow tuned correctly, and then worry about your broadhead flight. Because if you've got a properly tuned bow, unless you've got a parachute on the front of your broadhead, it should fly really well at hunting distances, no matter which one you choose. So it's a very, very valid point. So let's talk a little bit about you've done some crazy awesome testing on vanes here. So a lot of people might recognize this profile vane as the Max Hunter from AAE. Talk a little bit about the difference between this and the Max Hunter, and why you went with this material, why this vane. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and as we transition into that, let me just kind of mention mechanical versus fixed head, then it'll lead right into the vane discussion. So, there's a trade-off there, mechanical versus fixed heads, right? Mechanical, you have less surface area, so your bow can be further out of tune. You can be underspined on your arrow. You can have a bad form. You can have problems with your arrow flight that are covered up a bit more with a mechanical. Your mechanical head is going to hit closer to the field point than a fixed head generally when something's going wrong. If your arrow's coming out kicking side to side, or excessively flexing if it's underspined. So it can make you look like you're fine and you just shoot a mechanical, right? Well, all those things should really be fixed anyways, because they're robbing you of energy. If your arrow's fishtailing on the way there, or if there's excessive, flexing, if you're underspined, you're getting excessive flexing like this all the way down range. And you can see that, I've seen that in high-speed video on underspined arrows. At impact, you want the arrow to be going in a straight line. All that mass to be going in a straight line to get max penetration. And if you're fishtailing or arrows flexing, you're really robbing yourself of energy, and you're going to reduce your penetration, especially with mechanical that takes so much force to open too. And the other thing about mechanicals is that there's so many ways they can fail. They can open up on the shot and not fly well. They can, at impact, they can really, you can hit a rib vertical or a thin part of scapula. There's a lot of things that can just stop them there that aren't going to stop a fixed blade. And then if you do hit anything a little bit heavier part of the shoulder blade, leg bone, whatever, you're pretty much done there. And there's different shot angles and things, like even down through a spine. There's some just bone that they don't get through very well, and it's going to stop you on the shot, right? I think that can happen is, let's say you penetrate and they may open up, or they might not open up and you might just get a pinhole, or they might open up but not lock out and just collapse right back down. I hear that a lot from people too. And then you get kind of a pinhole through, and then the blades are thin and long and cheap materials, so they can bend and break or remove that edge. So people feel like, I'm going to get a bigger hole, more, I'm going to kill the animal quicker, get more blood, whatever. Well, a lot of times you're not, because they don't cut all the way through. They hit a rib and take the edge off. So I'm pretty anti-mechanical in all the ways that I've seen that they can fail. And I think a durable, very sharp, cut on contact fixed blade head is totally the way to go, to get better penetration. The negative there, the trade-off there is they're going to be less forgiving in flight, because now you have some wings on the front that can catch air, or have air pressure that's going to want to push them off. So when you have that at the front, I 100% believe everybody can get fixed blade heads to fly well for them, because I've worked with so many hundreds of customers over the years. But you just have to have, a well-tuned bow. It doesn't have to be perfect, just relatively well-tuned bow, properly spined, and enough vane on the back, and properly vaned arrow. And the reason I sponsored this study with the University of Colorado was to I mean, I'd done a lot of my own testing and had things that I was telling people based on that, but I thought this is really an this is really a good opportunity here to help a lot of bow hunters by giving them some independent, university study on it to show them how to get fixed blade broadheads to fly well, and then they can use this, data. And we tested, I think it was 6 of the kind of top vanes in the industry for hunting, along with some prototype designs. And the one you mentioned is this hybrid hunter. So it's the Max Hunter profile. I worked with AAE to get this made in a few different materials, including their hybrid material. And we included this in the study. So we're at 3-degree helical on all the vanes. And then we looked at, accuracy, stability, drag, spin up, wind drift, and sound. We did this with computer modeling, fluid dynamic modeling, and then also, using a hooter shooter, shooting machine, and having high-speed camera, lab radar, a very sophisticated sound system. And we took a lot of data and analyzed it, and really had a lot of improvement here. Anyways, we found this hybrid hunter and the Max Hunter both did the best job out of everything for accuracy, stability. And we saw with this hybrid material, it showed some improvements over the Max material for it had reduced drag, reduced sound, reduced wind drift also slightly. So anyways, it was the best performing vane from our study. I worked with Easton to get this machine fletched onto Axis arrows, both standard and match grade. We started offering this to our customers. I wanted to just be able to say, here's an arrow and vane that's going to fly well with fixed blade broadheads, free to use.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's it's a very it was one of the ones that for me so I took it out to Total Archery Challenge Texas, and it was in my top 2 as far as like where it was grouping out at distance. Watching some slow motion video, obviously you've got a lot more awesome tech that you were working with, so you could go down to the nitty gritty. But just basically my in the field at TAC testing, this was one of the best. And I also didn't do it at a 3-degree. I did a full the AAE easy fletch, so it's like a 5 or 6 degree helical that it puts on there, which in turn, from what I understand and what I've seen, is out at those further like 80 to 100-yard distances or more, adds a little bit more drag just because there's more of the face of so like this part of the vane is exposed, which is causing a little bit more drag or parachuting, whatever people want to call it, out at distance. But it spins true. It does an amazing job with field points. I'm going to take it out and mess around with it with my broadheads. And of course, make sure my bow's in tune before that. So I can't blame the bow for shooting. It's got to be my fault, right? But it's awesome that you were able to come up with this material, and then you sell these on your site. For those that are interested in this one, being the fact that a lot of people were also caught up on the noise of Max Hunters. They're one of the louder vanes. People understand that they're one of the better ones as far as steering broadheads, but it definitely is one of the louder vanes. So with that being said, this being quieter would definitely be appealing to people that like that Max Hunter. And you sell these on your site. So
we do, yeah. For the guys that want to fletch them themselves, we just sell the vanes in 40 packs on our website.
And you don't have to use a primer pin. I can confirm that. So
yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that hybrid material is awesome. Okay.
With Loctite, 406.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'm trying to think, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about as far as your products go, for people that are interested in maybe pulling the trigger on some iron wheel broadheads, or your whole system? Actually, we didn't even get into your whole collar system, but you've got an entire system that people can use as well, the Snyder core system, or even just the collar with the hit insert. You've got a whole bunch of stuff going on there. So what's something else that you wanted to bring up here before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I could probably mention that. With fixed blade broadheads, it's also important that they spin true, and you should really have an arrow spinner, and every one of the arrows that's going to go into your quiver with a broadhead on it. You should really spin it, make sure the point of the arrow is just staying right where, draw a line underneath it maybe and look close. Is that point just staying right on that line, or is it wobbling back and forth? And it needs to stay on that line and spin true. Um, and so that if it doesn't, it can be your arrow, your components, your broadhead. A lot of times it is your components though. And often half outs, outserts add a lot of tolerances there, and then it's pretty easy for your broadhead to be pointing off one direction or another, just say 5 thousandths. Well, that wobbles enough to make it not fly very well at distance. So the system I like the best there for components is our reinforced hit system. And this is taking an Easton hit insert that's down inside your arrow and then putting an impact collar over the arrow, just kind of reinforce it. But the thing I like there is your broadhead, the shank of your broadhead aligns to the inside diameter of the arrow. So there's no tolerance stack up. It's pretty much guaranteed it's going to spin true because it's aligned right there. And so, yeah, that's why I really like that system. And that can help you with fixed broadhead flight for sure.
Yeah. And then if you're running the 4mm arrows, guys, he's got the Snyder core system, which in my opinion, there's really only two systems out there that I like for 4mm, because a lot of the other systems out there are outserts or half outs, because you can't really, there's not a lot that will go into the shaft of a 4mm arrow. So the Snyder core system is basically the iron will broadhead with a pin that goes down the shaft. So instead of having this, try not to cut myself here because these are all super sharp. There we go. So instead of having this part, it's a long pin that runs down into the shaft of the arrow about that far, something along those lines. So it reinforces that with the collar that you would put on the end of the arrow, and then the pin goes down the center of the shaft, creating a lot better, I guess, tolerances and just strength in the arrow components for if you're a 4mm guy. So if that's what you're wanting to run, you could get the screw ins with some other, half out, whatever, but I'd recommend the Snyder core system just for that, the strength that it gives that 4mm. So I think that's about it. Did I miss anything as far as any of your products or anything that you guys that you're looking to put out there?
No, I think that's good. I mean, we make some ultralight hunting knives too. People can check those out using our same A2 tool steel and our heat treat process and cryogenic treatment and everything that developed to have a good sharpness, edge retention, toughness. So those just weigh about an ounce, 1 to 2 ounces for our ultralight hunting knives. So you can check those out. But no, that's about it.
Awesome. And is there anything else that you wanted to leave the audience or listeners with?
Yeah, I think I would say that we have some arrow charts on our website that people can kind of look up. I think unless you're into using Archer's Advantage or Pinwheel or something already, I think there's kind of a lack of information out there on if guys want to put 150 or 175 up front, how am I properly spined? So we put together some arrow charts that show that you can pick your total weight up front. So this would be broadhead, collar, insert, everything total there. And we've got charts that go, 125, 150, 175, I think all the way up to 250 right now. So you can kind of look at, and right in the chart, it'll show you which is the proper spine. It'll also show you what your total arrow weight's going to be, and then your FOC. This is assuming the Easton axis and the iron will hybrid hunter vane, but it'll give you an idea, really for your average setup where you want to be. And so I'd say take a look at that. It can really help you pick the right setup. Also, our customer service is great. Bailey Cloud answers a lot of questions, and she's very experienced, very knowledgeable, bow hunter and bow tag, competitive archer. So she's helping a lot of people with their setups right now as they want to maybe change their arrow setups next year.
That's awesome. Awesome, guys. Well, if you guys didn't know Iron Will before, Iron Will Bill, then you do now. He's a very knowledgeable individual, knows what he's doing. He's solving issues that he's finding, and he's using his products. He's not just trying to sell you something. He wants you to have a better experience when you do have that opportunity on the bull of a lifetime or the mule deer, whatever it is that you're out there hunting. He wants you to be able to get best blood trails, best penetration, and chance at success once you release that arrow. So definitely go check out Iron Will and Bill's information that he's putting out there on his site. I'll leave all the links down below. Thanks again for your time, Bill. I really do appreciate you hopping on with me today.
Yeah, you bet. And our website is just ironwilloutfitters.com, and that's our Instagram too, if you're into that, and Facebook, Iron Will Outfitters. So thanks a lot,
Perfect.
John. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
of course. And I'll leave all that down below, guys. You guys go check it out. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day. And of course, get out, live your life, and love it.